life mentoring coaching with some of my employees, just on topics that they would like to improve in. One of
That's
them
great.
wants to understand our numbers better on how I make decisions. Sure, let's go. Let's do it. Let's analyze some deals. I'm doing that right after this, actually.
So let's talk about a little bit about the case for kind of scaling. So this is one of the, one of the hardest things that a lot of people have is bridging that gap. They can't leave a good paying job. Now the truth is like in my instance, I had a really good paying job, but I just lost it one day
Yeah.
out of nowhere, twice actually. Once I got fired, and then once I actually left on my own the second time. But right after the company, I knew they were about to file for bankruptcy, and I was like, hey, they're not dying right now. It took 2 or 3 years for them to die. But when you go through a bankruptcy process, usually, in this instance, it was a retailer. So usually it's just a lifeline towards the inevitable. But it's just, things get buttoned up. Like the heydays were over, let's say, and the opportunity for me was over because I was a growth guy. So, but a lot of people in that situation, they're like, I'm not saying they're necessarily living paycheck to paycheck, which I think the average American is, but
Yeah.
you don't have usually a ton of savings to kind of bridge that gap. So a lot of people, they know they're here and they know they want to get over here. And it's just to bridge that gap between the two things is the hard part. And truthfully, so what happens is a lot of people, they go to a weekend seminar and they think they're going to start investing part-time. You were doing some of that too, right? You bridge the gap, but a lot of people, they just never have the time to treat it like a real business. And therefore that part-time hobby can't offset your income. So just talk about kind of the case for scaling, like how to get in business and scale quickly so that you can, justify that leap.
Yeah. For me, it was we worked backwards. We knew what kind of income we needed to replace, and we worked backwards from there. But then we also knew that I didn't want to just replace the income that I was making. I wanted to do better.
Right.
I'm somebody who, to a fault sometimes, wants to do everything bigger and better. It's the way I am. I don't appear competitive a lot of times, but I am very competitive, especially with myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I ended up running a marathon when I shouldn't have. But that's a whole other story. Yeah, we knew what kind of income we needed to replace, and so we backed into our numbers. Talked to a number of investors here in Oklahoma City, knew what the market was like, and kind of just went backwards into that.
Yeah. So
Later,
let's talk about, and for that is true because a lot of people don't really understand. They just like, well, I'm going to go do deals. But if you know your average margin, if you're going to wholesale versus an average margin, if you're going to retail, you can say, okay, well, to make $100,000, here's what I need to do, right? You can kind of back into, okay, this overhead's going to cost me this much. Lead generation is the important part, right? This is going to cost me this much. And so, I would advocate, I've been coaching and mentoring for a long, long time. There's so many people that if you say, hey, it's going to cost you, just make it up, $4,000 in advertising to buy a house. And in order to hit your goals, you need to do 3 a month. So you need to spend $12,000, hit your goal. And they're like, oh yeah, I get it. And then they're like, yeah, I just started my advertising. I started with $2,000. You're like, well, you're not going to hit your goal. What? Like, there's no magic that's going to like somehow come into effect that's going to replace math, at the end of the day. And so people just like, they just kind of, don't invest in, you talk about investing in people. You also have to invest in advertising, right? To help kind of feed that funnel.
Yeah, you need to invest in advertising. You also need to invest in yourself. There's a lot of people that go to RIAs, and yeah, you're investing in your time into that and stuff, but you need to do more to invest in yourself. I was never a reader. It just, I couldn't do it. I'd fall asleep. It just bored me.
Yeah.
In the last 3.5, 4 years, I use Audible because I drive a lot. So it's not physically reading, but I use that as self-development time. I do things like Investor Fuel for self-development.
Yeah.
I promote with my employees self-development. I've started doing some life mentoring coaching with some of my employees, just on topics that they would like to improve in. One of them wants to understand our numbers better on how I make decisions. Sure, let's go. Let's do it. Let's analyze some deals.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that right after this, actually.